My parents asked me to be best man and plan the entire wedding. What they did to me 1 week before will make you sick. I'm James, I'm 32 years old, and my family uninvited me from my own brother's wedding 1 week before the ceremony, after I had spent $15,000 of my own money, my entire life savings, to pay for it. Before I tell you how I got my epic, soul-satisfying revenge, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. It all started, as so many of life's disasters do, with a single, deceptively simple email. The subject line was just 4 words, typed out in lowercase, almost offensively casual: changes to the wedding. It was from my stepbrother, Ryan. My laptop screen cast a pale, ghostly blue light across my small Chicago studio apartment. Outside, the city hummed its constant, indifferent lullaby, but inside my 4 walls, a sudden, deafening silence fell. The kind of silence that precedes an explosion. For the last 8 months, my entire existence had been orbiting this wedding. It was supposed to be more than just a ceremony. It was my application for readmission into a family that had only ever treated me like a long-term guest. It was my chance, I thought, to finally prove my worth. And I had poured everything I had into it. Every spare minute, every ounce of creative energy, and a chunk of my savings so terrifyingly large it made my stomach clench every time I thought about it. My heart began a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Changes? What changes? Every detail was locked down. The photographer was confirmed. The floral arrangements were finalized. The venue deposit was paid. I knew because I had done it all myself. I had the spreadsheets, the contracts, the sleepless nights to prove it. My hand trembled slightly as I moved the cursor and clicked open the email. The body of the message was even shorter than the subject line. It was a single, cryptic sentence. Hey James, some things have come up. Give me a call when you can. No context. No explanation. Just a vague, unsettling command disguised as a request. I snatched my phone from the desk, my thumb already hovering over Ryan's contact photo. A smiling, sun-kissed picture of him on a boat, a life away from my own. I pressed the call button, straight to voicemail. Hey, it's Ryan. You know what to do. Beep. Ryan, it's me, I said, my voice tight, unnatural. I got your email. What's going on? Is everything okay? Call me back. I hung up and immediately tried again. The same cheerful, recorded voice. Voicemail. I tried a 3rd time, a knot of pure dread tightening in my gut. Voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the back of my neck. This wasn't like Ryan. For all his flaws, the man was surgically attached to his phone. A non-response was a response. I jabbed out a text message, my fingers clumsy. Tried calling. What's happening? Is everyone okay? The 3 little dots appeared, a sign of life on the other end. Then they vanished. They reappeared. Vanished again. He was typing, then deleting. My throat went bone dry. Something was fundamentally, terribly wrong. I stared at the screen, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone, waiting for a reply that felt like it was taking years to arrive. The city noise outside faded completely, leaving only the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart in the suffocating quiet of my apartment. Then, my phone buzzed, the vibration unnaturally loud against the wooden desk. A new message from Ryan had arrived. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the notification on my lock screen, a single line of text that seemed to burn a hole right through the glass. For a moment, I think I stopped breathing. It was in that split second, that heartbeat of silence before the words fully registered, that I felt a fundamental shift in my world. The sound of a crack appearing in a foundation I had spent my entire life trying to build. To understand why a single text message could shatter my world, you have to understand my family. Or rather, my 2 families. My first one, the one I was born into, ended abruptly when I was 12. My dad, a quiet man I barely knew, packed a single suitcase, told me to be a good boy, and walked out the door. We never saw him again. A few years later, my mom remarried a man named David Sterling, and just like that, I was airlifted out of my life and dropped into a foreign country. We moved from our modest, two-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood to David's sprawling, five-bedroom mansion in the wealthy suburbs. He was a real estate developer, a man who built and sold perfect homes for perfect families, and his own home was his greatest advertisement. Everything about him was polished to a high sheen. His tailored suits, his gleaming white teeth, his condescending, "I own this room" smile. And with David came his son, Ryan. Ryan was my new stepbrother, a year younger than me, and he was everything I wasn't. He was a natural athlete, effortlessly popular, the undisputed golden boy. The living room mantelpiece was a shrine to his achievements. Gleaming trophies for football, baseball, and swimming, each one catching the light from the expensive recessed lighting. My accomplishments were quieter, less tangible. I was the artistic kid, the one who spent hours locked in his room with sketchbooks and pencils, creating worlds no one else saw. On the rare occasion I won a school art competition, my mom would frame the certificate. But David would gently suggest it belonged elsewhere. "It's wonderful, honey," he'd say, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But it doesn't quite fit the aesthetic down here. Let's find a nice spot for it in the upstairs hallway." I learned the lesson quickly. In David Sterling's house, my world, my aesthetic, was always secondary, something to be hidden away. I wasn't family. I was a resident, a temporary feature he had graciously allowed in his otherwise perfect design. So you can imagine my shock when, 8 months ago, my mom and Ryan showed up at my tiny studio apartment. They looked utterly out of place, like royalty visiting the servants' quarters. They perched awkwardly on my second-hand couch while Ryan's fiancée, Megan, a pretty girl with a perpetually nervous smile, stood by the door. "So," Ryan began, always one to get straight to the point. He fidgeted with the cuff of his expensive shirt. "Megan and I were talking, and we'd be honored if you would be my best man." I just stared, my brain refusing to process the words. Best man. Me. The hallway-dwelling, artistically inclined outsider. It was like being asked to pilot a spaceship. It made no sense. My mom saw my confusion and jumped in, her voice a little too bright. "And we were hoping, since you're so incredibly talented with organizing things, with design and all that maybe you could help us plan it? You know your brother." She laughed a tinkling, false laugh. "He's got wonderful taste, but details? They just fly right over his head." It was a masterstroke of manipulation, aimed directly at my deepest insecurity. They weren't just asking me to be in the wedding. They were saying they needed me, my skills, my aesthetic. For the first time, it wasn't something to be hidden upstairs. It was essential. It felt like a tidal wave of acceptance, a validation I had craved for 20 years. I said yes instantly, drowning out the tiny, cynical voice in the back of my head that sounded suspiciously like my best friend, Chloe. The next 8 months were a relentless, all-consuming blur. I became a one-man wedding planning agency. I built spreadsheets so detailed they could have been used to plan a military invasion. I spent my nights and weekends on the phone, charming, cajoling, and negotiating with florists, photographers, caterers, and band leaders. Every Saturday, without fail, I made the 2-hour drive from Chicago back to the suburbs for some new task. Cake tasting, venue tours, meetings with Megan's parents. Ryan and Megan would usually show up late, offer a vague, "looks great," and then leave to go meet their friends for brunch. I was the workhorse. The problem was, Ryan had the taste of a millionaire and the budget of a college student. His vision was a champagne wedding on a beer budget, and I was the one left to bridge the gap. It started with the photographer. The one Megan absolutely had to have was $4,000 over their budget. Ryan called me in a panic. "I don't know what to do, man. She'll be devastated." And I heard the words coming out of my own mouth before I could stop them. "Don't worry about it. I'll cover it. Consider it my wedding gift to you both." The relief in his voice was my reward. A few weeks later, it was the flowers. Megan had her heart set on cascading orchids and rare peonies, not the standard roses and carnations in their package. The upgrade was a staggering $8,000. I looked at my own bank account, at the line item labeled house down payment. It was my life savings, the physical manifestation of my dream to own a space that was truly mine. Then I thought about the wedding, about standing next to Ryan as his best man, about David finally looking at me with something other than mild disdain. I took a deep breath and made the transfer. "It's handled," I texted Ryan. The final blow was the rehearsal dinner. David had sneered at the modest restaurant they'd chosen. "It's not impressive enough for my guests," he'd declared. The chic, upscale bistro Megan wanted was available, but it cost $3,000 just to reserve the private room. Ryan didn't even have to ask. I just did it. In total, I spent $15,000. My entire dream, liquidated and poured into their party. "You are certifiably insane, James," Chloe told me over coffee, her expression a mixture of pity and exasperation after I confessed the grand total. "You are not investing in a wedding. You are trying to buy a family. That's not how it works. Love isn't transactional." "This time it's different," I insisted, trying to convince myself as much as her. "I'm not just the weird stepbrother anymore. I'm the best man. I'm essential." And I almost believed it. But then, about 2 weeks before the big day, the atmosphere began to shift. Ryan became distant. Texts went unanswered for hours. When I asked him about planning the bachelor party, he got squirrely. Don't worry about it, man," he stammered. "It's just a thing with my old college buddies. You wouldn't really know anyone." It was a flimsy excuse, and it stung. The chill became undeniable during a final planning meeting with the florist. David's sister, my Aunt Carol, a woman who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes, made a surprise appearance. She surveyed the extravagant orchid arrangements I had personally selected and paid for. My, she purred, looking directly at me. "All this for a wedding. You're still enjoying that freewheeling bachelor life in the big city, aren't you, James? It must be liberating." She said bachelor like it was a disease. The only bright spot in that period was meeting Megan's brother, Marcus. He showed up at the flower shop and was the complete opposite of my family. Warm, genuine, and unpretentious. He looked at the detailed mood board I had created, a collage of fabrics, colors, and lighting schemes. "Wow, man," he said, shaking his head in genuine admiration. "You have an incredible eye for this. Seriously, my sister and Ryan are unbelievably lucky to have you." For a fleeting moment I felt seen, appreciated. It was a brief, positive encounter, but it stuck with me, a single point of light in a darkening room. Still, I pushed down my unease. I told myself it was just pre-wedding jitters. I told myself my $15,000 investment was secure. I told myself I was family. I was an idiot. Back in my apartment, staring at the present, the unopened text message from Ryan glowed on my phone screen like a digital fuse. My hand was shaking, but I forced it steady. I took a deep, ragged breath and tapped the screen to open it, to see the explosion that had already happened. The words were stark white against the blue message bubble. No greeting, no apology, just a guillotine blade dropping on 8 months of misplaced hope and crippling financial sacrifice. "James, you're not invited anymore." I read it once, then twice. My brain refused to assemble the letters into a coherent thought. It felt like a language I didn't speak. Not invited. Me, the best man, the planner, the bank. It was an impossibility, a tear in the fabric of reality. A wave of icy cold washed over me, so intense it felt like I'd been plunged into a frozen lake. This had to be a mistake. A sick, twisted joke that Ryan was playing. I immediately stabbed at the call button, my thumb hitting the screen with clumsy force. Straight to voicemail. I called my mom. She picked up on the 4th ring, and her voice was a thin, tight wire. "Hi, honey." "Mom, what is happening?" I asked, my voice cracking, pathetic in my own ears. "Ryan just sent me a text. He said I'm not invited to the wedding. This is a joke, right? A really, really messed up joke." The pause on the other end of the line was my answer. It was a silence so dense it felt like a physical object, pressing in on me from all sides. "James," she finally began, her voice faltering. It's It's very complicated right now. There's been some family drama. Family drama? I repeated the words, my voice rising in disbelief. I started pacing the 3 steps from my kitchenette to my window and back again. What family drama? I have spent nearly a year of my life planning this circus. I've been to every meeting, every tasting. I've handled every crisis. What could possibly have happened in the last 24 hours? You really should talk to Ryan about it, she said, her voice a weak, evasive whisper. It was her signature move, the one she'd perfected over years of living with David. Deflect, avoid, make it someone else's problem to solve. I'm trying to talk to Ryan, Mom, but he won't pick up his damn phone. I was shouting now, the sound echoing in my small, lonely apartment. You are my mother. You need to tell me what's going on. Right now. I can't, she said, and I could hear the wetness of tears in her voice. But they weren't tears for me. They were the selfish tears of her own weakness. Please just talk to your brother. Please don't make this harder. And then she hung up. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air of the dial tone. She hung up on me, my own mother. In the most critical, confusing moment of my life, she chose to hang up. The cold shock that had paralyzed me began to thaw, replaced by a frantic, desperate energy. I called Ryan again, and again. For 10 solid minutes, I hit redial the second the call went to voicemail, my thumb moving with a mechanical, obsessive rhythm. Finally, on what must have been the 20th try, he picked up. What? He answered, his voice as cold and flat as a stone. What? What do you mean, what? I shot back, my words tumbling out in a rush. Your text, Ryan. You're not invited anymore. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means what it says, James, he replied, his tone utterly devoid of emotion, as if he were reading a weather report. It was Mom and David's decision. We think it's for the best. For the best? For the best for who? What about the money, Ryan? My voice escalated, bordering on hysteria. The $15,000 I spent out of my own pocket? The photographer you had to have, the flowers Megan cried over, the rehearsal dinner your father sneered at. That was all me. My money. There was a short, sharp laugh on the other end of the line. It was the cruelest, most dismissive sound I had ever heard. That was your choice, man, he said, and the words hit me with the force of a physical blow. You offered. Nobody put a gun to your head. It was so cold, so transactional. But it wasn't his voice. I could hear David's smug, corporate logic behind the words, the casual cruelty of a man who saw everything, even family, as a negotiation to be won. Ryan was just the puppet, and David was the one pulling the strings, making his mouth move. The message was clear, we used you. The transaction is complete. Now get lost. A strange calm descended over my fury. This isn't over, Ryan, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Actually, it is, he replied with chilling finality. And then he too hung up. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I was a statue in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of a wedding that was no longer mine. The carefully curated mood boards on my wall, filled with swatches of fabric and photos of flowers, seemed to mock me. The thick stack of vendor contracts on my desk felt like a monument to my own staggering stupidity. He was right. It was my choice. I had chosen to believe their performance. I had chosen to trade my future for a fantasy of their acceptance. And they had just cashed my check and thrown me out of the club. The icy shock that had encased me finally shattered, replaced by a heat that started in my chest and spread like wildfire through my entire body. It was pure, white-hot rage. A rage so clean and clarifying it felt like a religious experience. They were not going to get away with this. My mom could hide behind her tears and Ryan could hide behind his phone. But I knew who was really responsible. I knew who had written the script. David. I snatched my keys from the hook by the door, my movements sharp and jerky with newfound purpose. I didn't have a fully formed plan. I just had an overwhelming, undeniable need to look them in the eye, to stand in their perfect house, in front of their perfect family, and make them see the imperfect, messy, furious reality of what they had just done. I slammed the door to my apartment so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall, and I headed for my car, the 2-hour drive to the suburbs stretching out before me like a warpath. The 2-hour drive was a fever dream fueled by caffeine and fury. The endless ribbon of highway lights blurred into streaks, each one a flashpoint for a memory. I saw myself as a teenager, sitting at their massive dining table, listening to David grill me about my future while he praised Ryan for scoring a touchdown. I saw myself at my college graduation, scanning the crowd for my mom and David, only to see them leaving early because Ryan had a baseball game they couldn't miss. Every slight, every casual dismissal, every moment I had been made to feel like a second-class citizen in their home. It all came rushing back, not as sad memories, but as evidence. Exhibits A through Z in the case I was building in my head. I wasn't just driving to their house. I was driving back through 20 years of being treated like an afterthought. When I finally pulled into the long, curved driveway of the mansion, my headlights swept across the perfectly manicured lawn and the 3-car garage. My mom's SUV was there, alongside David's gleaming black Mercedes. I didn't bother ringing the bell. I used the key she'd given me years ago, a key I'd always felt like an intruder for using, and let myself in. The house was silent except for the low hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. I found her in the cavernous kitchen, staring out the large bay window at the pristinely landscaped backyard, a half-empty glass of Chardonnay in her hand. The setting sun cast long shadows across the granite countertops. She jumped when she heard the heavy front door click shut, and spun around, her face pale with guilt. "James," she breathed, her hand flying to her throat. "What are you doing here? I told you not to come." "I'm here for an explanation," I said, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. I walked toward her, and she flinched, taking a small, involuntary step back, as if my anger were a physical force. A real one, not the family drama garbage you tried to sell me on the phone. Tears immediately welled in her eyes, the default response she used to deflect any real conflict. "Please, honey, don't do this. Not tonight." "Do what, Mom?" My voice was rising now, echoing slightly in the cathedral-like space. "Do what? Ask why my own mother is letting her husband and my stepbrother throw me away like a piece of trash? After I poured my heart and my soul and my entire life savings into this wedding for them." The tears spilled over then, a silent, pathetic cascade down her cheeks. She collapsed into one of the expensive-looking kitchen chairs, her shoulders shaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed into her hands. "Then what was it supposed to be like?" I pressed, standing over her, refusing to let her hide. "Tell me." She finally looked up, her face a mess of running mascara and despair. "It was David," she admitted, her voice a ragged whisper. "It was David and his sister, Carol. They started talking a few weeks ago. It was after that day at the florist. Carol kept making comments, you know how she is, little digs, about you being unmarried, about your bohemian lifestyle in the city. She called you unsettled." She took a shaky sip of wine, her hand trembling. "David, he latches onto things like that. He got this idea in his head. He said it didn't look right. He said his side of the family, his business partners who were coming, they were all very traditional. He said having an unmarried best man who wasn't his real son, it would make people ask questions. It would spoil the perfect picture." I just stared at her, the final, sickening pieces clicking into place. It wasn't about drama. It was about branding. It was about aesthetics. It was the same reason my childhood drawings were banished to the upstairs hallway. I didn't fit the picture of the perfect, wealthy, sterling family he was trying to sell to the world. I was a loose thread on his perfectly tailored suit. "And you?" I asked, my voice hollow. "What did you say? Did you say anything at all?" "I tried," she cried, her voice rising in a desperate, defensive screech. "I really did, James. I told him he was being ridiculous, that you'd done everything for them, that you'd paid for half of it, but he got so angry. He got that look in his eye. He started yelling. He said if I couldn't support his vision for this family, then maybe I didn't belong in it either. He said he could take all of this away in a second. Her hand swept vaguely around the multi-million-dollar kitchen. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. I was scared, James. I was so scared of losing it all. And in that moment, with that one pathetic admission, every last ounce of anger drained out of me, replaced by a profound, empty sadness. She hadn't been scared for me. She had been scared for herself. Scared of losing the mansion, the Mercedes, the country club membership. She had made a choice just like I had. She had chosen a life of comfortable cowardice over her own son. There was nothing left to say. There was no one home to say it to. She was a ghost in her own beautiful, empty house, haunted by the choices she'd made. I turned and walked out without another word. I didn't slam the door this time. I closed it softly behind me, on a part of my life that was now officially over. The drive back to Chicago was different. The fury was gone. The sadness was gone. All that remained was a strange, chilling calm, a clarity so sharp it felt like a weapon. The part of me that had spent 20 years desperately craving their approval had finally, blessedly, died on the cold Italian tile floor of that kitchen. I got back to my apartment and walked straight to my desk. I sat there for a long time, just looking at the pile of contracts and invoices, the receipt for the $8,000 floral upgrade, the signed agreement with the celebrity photographer, the email confirmation for the rehearsal dinner venue. All of it paid for with my credit card. All of it with my name, James Sullivan, printed at the bottom. My pain began to crystallize into something else. Something hard and clear and powerful. Plan. They had made it perfectly clear. I wasn't a member of the family. I was a contractor, a vendor, a service provider, and my services were no longer required. With a strange sense of detachment, a surgical precision, I started printing everything. Every receipt, every bank statement showing the transfers from my savings, every email chain where I had cheerfully written, "No problem, I'll cover it." I put them into a neat, professional-looking pile. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about breach of contract. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a different person. The desperate, eager-to-please James had been burned away in the fire of yesterday's revelations. In his place was someone who understood the cold, hard language of leverage. I showered, shaved, and put on a crisp, dark blue button-down shirt and a tailored blazer, the kind of armor I wore to pitch a major client, not to a family dinner. I drove not to the mansion, but to the gleaming glass and steel tower in downtown Chicago that housed David Sterling Developments. I knew from my mom's tearful confession that they were having a final planning meeting that morning with Megan and her family. A meeting to finalize the details of a wedding I was no longer a part of. The lobby was a symphony of marble and hushed importance. The receptionist, a cool blonde with a headset, looked up as I approached. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see David Sterling," I said, my voice calm and even. "My name is James Sullivan. He's expecting me." It was a lie, but I delivered it with the unshakable conviction of a man who belonged there. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Just then, as if on cue from a movie script, the elevator doors chimed and opened. Out walked Megan's brother, Marcus, looking harried and holding 2 large coffees. He saw me and his face lit up in a genuine, unforced smile. It was a startling contrast to the coldness I had been marinating in for the past 24 hours. "James, hey man, good to see you. You heading up to the meeting?" he asked, shifting the coffees to one hand. It was the perfect Trojan horse. "I am," I said, my expression neutral. "Great. Come on," he said, gesturing with his head and holding the elevator door open for me. The receptionist saw the interaction and simply nodded, her doubts erased. I had been vouched for. We rode the elevator up in a comfortable silence. When the doors opened on the 34th floor, I could see them through the glass walls of the main conference room. David was at the head of a long, polished mahogany table, holding court. Ryan and Megan were on one side, looking smug and self-satisfied. They were all laughing at something David had said. I walked in behind Marcus. The laughter died the second they saw my face. It was like someone had hit the mute button on the entire room. The smiles froze, curdling on their faces. "James," David said, his voice instantly tight with disapproval, the genial patriarch vanishing in a puff of smoke. "What are you doing here? This is a private family meeting." "I know what it is," I said calmly, walking with deliberate steps toward the massive table. My footsteps were the only sound in the room. "And you're right, it is private. Which is why I'm here to discuss a few business matters before I leave you to it." Ryan, ever the hothead, started to stand up, his face already turning a blotchy red. "You need to leave right now. You are not welcome here." I didn't even glance at him. My focus was entirely on the man at the head of the table. To his credit, Marcus looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. He set the coffees down and took a step back, distancing himself from the unfolding drama as if to say, "I'm not a part of this." David, ever the master of control, leaned back in his throne-like leather chair. He steepled his fingers and put on a mask of magnanimous condescension. "Son," he began, and the word dripped with a false sincerity that made my skin crawl. "I understand that you're upset, but you have to try to see the bigger picture. A wedding, it's about family. It's about tradition. And your situation, it just doesn't fit with the image we want to present to our guests. It was a difficult decision, I assure you, but it was made for the good of the family." This was it. The grand speech, the justification of his cruelty, wrapped in the noble language of family values. It was my cue. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply took the neat, inch-thick stack of papers out of my leather portfolio and placed it gently, almost reverently, on the polished table. The top page was the $8,000 invoice for the floral arrangements, with my name and credit card number clearly visible at the bottom. I gave it a small push, and it slid across the gleaming wood to stop directly in front of David. "You're right, David," I said. My voice as cold and hard as the glass tower surrounding us. "A wedding is about family, and you and my mother and my brother have all made it crystal clear over the last 24 hours that I am not a part of yours." I let the words hang in the silent, air-conditioned room. "So I'm here to formally dissolve our business relationship," I continued, my gaze sweeping from David to Ryan to Megan. "As you know, all of these initial deposits, the photographer, the band, the upgraded floral package, the rehearsal dinner venue, were paid for with my personal credit card. They are all under contracts signed by me." I tapped the stack of papers for emphasis. "The final payments, which, as I'm sure you're aware, constitute the bulk of the cost, are all due tomorrow." I paused, letting the full weight of the situation settle into their brains. I saw the flash of panic in Megan's eyes as she glanced at Ryan. I saw Ryan's jaw go slack as the smugness drained from his face. "I've just spent a very productive morning on the phone," I said, delivering the final surgical blow. "I have informed every single one of these vendors that, due to unforeseen and unfortunate personal circumstances, the contracts which are in my name have been cancelled. I will not be making any further payments. As per the clauses in my agreements, the deposits are forfeited, but all future services are terminated, effective immediately." The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was the sound of a perfect, expensive dream imploding. David's face went from smug to confused to a deep, dangerous shade of purple. The mask of the calm, powerful developer had not just slipped. It had shattered into 1,000 pieces. "You can't do that," he finally sputtered, his voice a strangled, incredulous whisper. "I already have," I replied. I finally turned my attention to Ryan and Megan. They looked like children who had just been told that Christmas was canceled forever. "When you decided I wasn't family enough to attend your wedding, you also decided I wasn't family enough to pay for it." I turned and walked toward the door, my back straight, my head held high. As I left, I caught Marcus's eye one last time. He wasn't looking at his sister or her future husband. He was looking at David, and the expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. I didn't look back. I walked out of that conference room, out of that building, and into the bright Chicago sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in my entire adult life. The deal was done. The moment I stepped out onto the bustling street, my phone, which had been peacefully silent, began to have a complete and total meltdown. It was as if a dam of frantic communication had burst. First, a call from Ryan. I smiled and let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text from him popped up. "Call me now. This isn't funny. You're ruining everything." Then, a call from a number I didn't recognize, but the caller ID showed Sterling Developments. That would be David, having commandeered his secretary's phone. I silenced it and slipped the phone into my pocket. Next came a string of texts from Megan, each more hysterical than the last. "James, please, we can talk about this." Followed by, "My mother is crying." And my personal favorite, "You're ruining my wedding," with 3 exclamation points. The entitlement was breathtaking. And of course, there was the inevitable, frantic, typo-riddled text from my mother. "James, what have you done? David is furious. You have to call him and fix this right now." I stood on a busy Chicago street corner, surrounded by the normal, everyday chaos of the city, and watched the digital frenzy pile up on my screen. I felt a profound sense of peace, a detached amusement. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. For 20 years, I had been the one waiting anxiously by the phone, desperate for their calls, their texts, their meager scraps of attention. Now they were the ones who were desperate. They were the ones on the outside looking in. With a slow, deliberate calm, I scrolled through the messages, a small smile playing on my lips. I opened up the group chat that I had created months ago for wedding planning, the one ironically titled Ryan and Megan's Big Day, which included me, Ryan, Megan, and my mom. I typed out one final message, my magnum opus of petty, well-deserved revenge. "Congratulations on the wedding. Hope you two like silk flowers from the craft store and a supermarket sheet cake. Enjoy the party you can actually afford." I hit send. Then, with a deep sense of satisfaction, I tapped the options, selected Leave Conversation, and proceeded to block every single one of their numbers. Ryan, Megan, my mother, David's office line, block, 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 block. The ensuing silence was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The wedding happened a week later as scheduled. I obviously was not in attendance. I spent the day hiking with Chloe in a state park miles away from the city, breathing in the clean, crisp autumn air, feeling the sun on my face, and not thinking about them at all. It was the first Saturday in 8 months that felt truly my own. But, of course, I heard about the aftermath. Chloe, being the world's greatest and most loyal friend, had a friend who worked for a catering company that sometimes freelanced at the very venue they had booked. The gossip, she told me later over celebratory beers, was juicier and more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. "It was a complete and utter disaster, James," she said, her eyes gleaming with righteous, vicarious satisfaction. "An absolute train wreck of snobbery and poor planning." I leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "Tell me everything." "Okay," she began, taking a dramatic sip of her beer. "So, David apparently tried to throw money at the problem at the last minute, but it was too late. You can't book a top-tier photographer or a good wedding band with less than a week's notice. It's impossible." "So what did they do?" I asked, grinning. "The pictures," she said, trying to suppress a giggle, "were taken by one of Megan's teenage cousins on his iPhone. My source said he spent most of his time trying to get the right angle for his selfies. The upgraded floral arrangements you canceled were replaced by the venue's default package. We're talking sad, droopy carnations and a lot of baby's breath. It looked like a 1980s prom." I burst out laughing, a deep, genuine, cathartic laugh that came from the very bottom of my soul. "Oh, it gets better," Chloe continued, her grin widening. "The fantastic 8-piece band you had booked? They were replaced by a single Bluetooth speaker propped up on a side table, playing a Spotify playlist that kept getting interrupted by ads for car insurance." I was wiping tears of laughter from my eyes. "No." "Yes. And the rehearsal dinner. It had to be moved from that chic French bistro you booked to the back room of a chain steakhouse by the highway. And the main dinner itself was simplified. The caterer's friend said it had all the ambience of a sad corporate luncheon. David was apparently walking around all night with a face like a thundercloud, looking like he wanted to murder someone. The image was so perfect, so beautifully, poetically ironic. David Sterling, the man obsessed with image, the man who had exiled me because I didn't fit his aesthetic, had just hosted the tackiest, cheapest-looking, most embarrassing wedding of the year. He hadn't just lost the money I'd spent, he'd lost face. And for a man like David, that was a fate far worse than death. My $15,000 hadn't just bought them flowers and a photographer. It had bought me a front-row seat to the most satisfying karmic implosion I could have ever imagined. And the best part was, I didn't even have to be there to see it. The 6 months that followed the wedding weren't just a recovery. They were a renaissance. It was as if a heavy, suffocating blanket I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted. Without the constant, low-grade, soul-crushing stress of trying to earn my family's approval, I felt like I could finally breathe. All the creative energy, all the time, all the focus I had been pouring into their lives, I now poured back into my own. And my life began to flourish. I threw myself into my work with a newfound passion. A few weeks after the wedding fiasco, I landed a huge freelance contract with a major national ad agency. It was a campaign for a new luxury electric car, the kind of high-profile, creatively challenging project I'd only dreamed of before. They didn't care if I was married or single, if I lived in a mansion or a shoebox. They cared about my portfolio, my ideas, my talent. I worked tirelessly, not to please anyone, but for the sheer joy of creating something I was proud of. The campaign was a massive success. With the money from that project, I started to transform my small apartment from a temporary waiting room into a home. I sold the second-hand couch and bought a real one. I built custom shelves for my art books. I framed my own designs, not certificates but the actual work, and hung them on the walls. For the first time, I was creating a space that reflected my aesthetic, and there was no David Sterling to tell me it belonged in the hallway. My life was finally, truly my own. About a month after the wedding, my mother began to call. I let the first few attempts go to voicemail, the sound of the ringtone a ghost of my old anxiety. But I wasn't anxious anymore. I was just tired of it. Finally, one afternoon I picked up. Her apology was exactly what I expected. Weak, watery, and full of excuses. "I'm so sorry for how things turned out, honey," she said, her voice trembling. The old James would have accepted it just to keep the peace. The new James couldn't. "That's not good enough, Mom," I told her, my voice calm but firm, a tone she had never heard from me before. "I don't need an apology for how things turned out, as if it were a weather event. I need an apology for what you did, for choosing a house over your son, for your silence. Your silence was a choice." There was a long pause on the other end. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Then maybe you should think about it before you call me again," I said, and I hung up. It was harsh, but it was necessary. A month later, she called back. This time, the apology was different. It was painful, halting, and stripped of all excuses. It was the raw, ugly, honest truth. She admitted her fear, her weakness, her profound failure as a parent. It was the first truly honest conversation we had ever had. We started meeting for coffee once a month, in a neutral location downtown. It was awkward at first, like getting to know a stranger you were vaguely related to. We talked about my work, about the small things in her life. We were slowly, carefully, building something new from the wreckage of the old. A relationship based not on obligation, but on a fragile, newfound honesty. Then, 6 months to the day after the disastrous wedding, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved. My heart gave a little lurch, a muscle memory of old fears, but I quickly realized who it had to be. It was Marcus, Megan's brother. The message was short and to the point. "Hey James, Marcus here. Just thought you might want to know. Megan and Ryan separated last week. She's moving back home. The whole sham is officially over." I stared at the text, and a slow, sad smile spread across my face. It wasn't a feeling of triumph or happiness. It was just a validation. It was the quiet, inevitable confirmation of a fundamental truth. A foundation built on cruelty, selfishness, and lies couldn't possibly stand. It was always destined to crumble under its own weight. I typed back a simple reply, "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope Megan is doing okay." He responded almost immediately, "She'll be better off in the long run. We both know it was never going to last. You were right to walk away when you did." Walking away had been the hardest and best thing I had ever done. It hadn't just saved my money, it had saved my soul. My life was no longer defined by their endless drama, their impossible expectations, or their conditional, transactional love. It was defined by my work, by my friends like Chloe, and by my own hard-won peace of mind. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet, steady growth, of hard work paying off, and of a kind of deep, uncomplicated happiness I had never known before. The electric car campaign I'd led ended up winning a major national design award, one of the most prestigious in the industry. It was the biggest moment of my professional life, a concrete validation of my talent on a scale I couldn't have imagined. The awards ceremony was a glittering affair held in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel. The room was filled with the best and brightest in the creative world, all dressed in their finest. When they called my name, I felt a surge of pride so pure and powerful it almost knocked me over. I walked up to the stage, the applause a warm, rolling wave. I shook hands, accepted the heavy, polished gold trophy, and stepped up to the microphone. As I began my acceptance speech, thanking my team, my clients, and my incredible friend Chloe, who was beaming from a front row table, I instinctively scanned the vast, crowded room. And that's when I saw him, standing in the very back of the ballroom, half hidden in the shadows near an exit, was Ryan. He looked diminished, smaller. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a closet. The easy confidence, the golden boy swagger he had always worn like a second skin, was gone. Stripped of his father's money and influence, he wasn't the center of attention anymore. He was just a man in the back of a room where his estranged stepbrother was being celebrated, a ghost from a life I had long since left behind. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the cavernous room. I saw a flicker of something in his expression, regret, maybe, or envy. I didn't have time to decipher it. He looked away instantly, turned, and slipped out the side door before the applause for my speech had even begun to fade. Later that night, as I was sitting at a table with Chloe and my friends, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from a number I had long since blocked, but his name still popped up, a digital ghost. "Ryan, congrats," the message read. "Well deserved." I looked at the words on the screen. 2 years ago, a message like that from him, a simple acknowledgement of my success, would have been everything. It would have been the validation I had spent my entire life chasing, a sign that I had finally earned my place in his world. But now, it meant nothing. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel a surge of pity. I didn't feel anything at all. He was just a name on a screen, an echo from a story that was already over. My story was here in this room now. My family was Chloe, clinking her champagne glass against mine with a proud, teary-eyed grin. My validation was the heavy, beautiful trophy sitting in the middle of the table. With a sense of finality and a profound, unshakable peace, I held my thumb down on the message bubble, selected delete, and cleared the notification without a second thought. I didn't need his congratulations. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anything from him at all. I put my phone away, face down on the table, and turned back to my friends, back to my life, back to the sound of their laughter. I had learned the hard way that real family isn't something you're born into, but something you build. It's built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and unconditional love. And I had learned that sometimes the bravest, most powerful, and most liberating thing you can ever do is choose yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a difficult choice to stand up for yourself and your own worth? Please share your story in the comments below.